Welcome everyone back again to the next session of this ACT prep. And this session is going to be about conflicting viewpoints. So, what exactly is the difference in this particular section of ACT? How exactly you can tackle this section? And so, let's hear it from the himself, the Abhinav Garg, sir.
Thank you, Herschel. Hi, everyone. Back again. I know it's been a long day for you, but don't worry. I mean, what you learned here is going to be something phenomenal. Well, this one is a very short session, and all I can tell you is that if you attended the SAT sessions in the afternoon, you can give a skip to the one after that because there's going to be kind of parallel. Or you may just choose to be in there. It's going to be something different as well. Right. So we talked about the science section and how it is not as challenging as it sounds to be. Well, the current session is a very, very short session. I mean, we could have done it in one long session, but I prefer two shorter ones instead. So we'll talk about that part, which is the most challenging on the ACT science, the conflicting viewpoints. So let's see what does it look like, conflicting viewpoints. Oh, thanks for the compliment, Ankit. Conflicting viewpoints here is normally the toughest of the 6 or 7 passages on the ACT science. So one thing which I would advise all of you to do is attempt this particular passage right at the end, because this would always take longer than usual, to master. Also, as you go through your training for the ACT, it is mastering this passage that will take you considerably longer amount of time. So let's see what does this passage look like. And I'll be using a PDF here for a change. We'll come back to the other variety later on. And this is an expert from the book that I was talking about, For the Love of ACT Science by Michael Serro. So I have my passages at the left and I have my questions to the right. Now, as you read through this passage, what is the greatest challenge that I can see over here? The greatest challenge that I can see over is no pictorial data, no visual data here. I don't have any graphs. I don't have any tables. And as a result, when I don't have graphs and I don't have tables, I've got no locators. Which means the strategy that we had decided on, which said that we are not going to read the passage, but we are going to the questions directly, figure out what is it that you are required, and then go back to your data and sift out the information, is not going to work here. Why? Because until I go through the passage, how do I know where I'm going to look for the answers for? That's one. Second, if I do read the passage, it has two associated problems. Number one, it pushes me back on the time front. And number two, which is more serious, it creates a huge amount of information overload, which I'm not best equipped to handle. Further, as we go through these passages, you'll figure out that there's going to be something which is being discussed here. And you've got multiple people who are expressing their opinions about this theory or this scientific fact that we're talking about. And these could be scientists, they could be students, they could be people, they could be anybody. And most of them would not talk sense at most points in time. A lot of it could be absolute utter nonsense that makes no scientific sense, and which makes it very difficult for you to rationalize, to figure out, I mean, what do I do with them? So that's the strange challenge that we have over here. So how do we go about reconciling these two? Well, here is what I have to say. So I'm going to take you through one such session abridged. We're going to discuss the strategy, and then we'll see if we can apply it to one of such passages. That's all. I mean, it may take another 15-20 minutes of your time. So what's the strategy now? What we learned earlier was do not read the passage, but now we've come down to a type of passages where if you do not read, you cannot go further. So what do we do? I tell you what we do. We stick to our old strategy. We just add one word over there. So my earlier strategy was do not read passages. I'm going to insert one modifier here. Do not fully or do not completely read passages. We're going to read them in part. And when I say we're going to read them in part, why do we do that? What is the intended purpose? The intended purpose is to keep information overload out of it, right? So let me take you through something. Here we go. Right, so it is a similar passage which is abridged. So I've not given you the complete passage here, and I'll tell you the reason. So whenever I come across such a passage, typically I would read the last 1 or 2 lines of the introduction. Please know, even if it is a paragraph long introduction, I'm not going to read all of this. I'll just read the last 1 or 2 lines so as to figure out what is being discussed here. So 3 17th century scientists are attempt to explain the color of sky. Okay, fair enough. Now, for each of these scientists, I'll carefully read the first line only, or maybe at times there were just 2 scientists, I may read 2 lines, just to figure out what is it that their prime hypothesis, prime proposition is. What is the main point here? What is it that would, summarize what this scientist wants to say, and read no further. For example, for the first one, the sky is blue because light from sun reflects off of ocean's waters. This is his hypothesis why the sky is blue, because he says, it's the reflection of ocean water. Fair enough. I'm not going to read further than this. Okay. Second, the sky is blue because shorter wavelengths of light scatter more strongly. Fair enough. So till now, what is the position that I have taken? The first one is talking about reflection from the ocean, and the second one is relating it to shorter wavelengths of light that scatter more strongly. Third, this is interesting. I agree with scientists too, but with one exception. Guys, please note, this is the most dangerous statement. And this is this statement that will make you commit most mistakes. The moment you come across this statement, what do? Pause for a moment, qualify this statement further, be very clear in your mind that what is the agreement here and what is the exception. Unless you do that, you'll end up making mistakes. So what do? I read the scientist further. Upper one, scientist 2. The color blue has shortest wavelength and therefore scatters prominently throughout the sky. Third one, the color of sky is actually a mixture of short wavelengths largely comprised of blue and green. So whereas the upper scientist says it is blue, which is shortest wavelength, second one says it is a mixture of short wavelengths. So this is the exception. This is how the 2 scientists are differing from each other. Then what is the agreement? The agreement is the first statement. Shorter wavelengths of light scatter more strongly. Both scientists say that shorter wavelengths of light scatter more strongly. As a thumb rule here, it is the first statement of the upper scientist that the lower scientist would agree with. And then the differences would be captured in the lower part of the text, right? So please be very clear about this difference. And read this twice. Agreement, this is the agreement and this is the exception. Now, trust me, when you've read as much, it will be sufficient for you to answer 70% of the questions. What did I say? 70% of the questions. If you have just read the first line and given meaning to it for each of the scientists, very clearly highlighting how one of them is different from the other one, it would make you answer 70% of the questions, right? What about the remaining 30%? I'll go back. And now I have locators in place. So by reading these first lines, I have created locators. We'll just see how that happens. Fair? And we'll go back, we'll read the passage again at the relevant place, and we'll get those answers out and we'll answer it. Okay, so let's go straight into questions. Question number one, which scientist, if any, would assert that color of sky is dependent on Earth's oceans? We know that it is scientist one, because scientist one talks about reflections from oceans. Scientists 2 and 3 are talking about wavelengths of light, so it's irrelevant. Which scientist, if any, would assert that color of sky is dependent of Earth's clouds? Did we read about clouds somewhere? No, we did not. So the answer has to be none of the scientists. Question 3, I find lots of students making a mistake on this one. Which scientist, if any, would assert that color of sky is dependent upon the different wavelengths of light? I have a lot of students who would answer scientist 2 as the answer. And if that is the case, you have missed out this I agree part. When I agree to what? I agree to the first statement. So both scientists 2 and 3, they say what? They say shorter wavelengths of light scatter more strongly. So it has to be what? Scientists 2 and 3. Fair enough. Let's move on here. Now, boys and girls, on the left-hand side, you have the same passage, which is now expanded. And I'm not going to read it further. I've read as much as I wanted to read. Okay. And we read through question number 4. The present-day electromagnetic spectrum shows color purple to have the shortest wavelength. This evidence weakens, if at all, the viewpoint of which scientist? Hold your horses. So I know my first line would not give me an answer to this question. I'll have to go back, read more, and find out where my answer is. That the shortest wavelength being purple is going to contradict which scientist. But at the same time, I know that I do not have to read scientist 1, correct? Why? Because I know scientist 1 is not talking about wavelengths of light. He is talking about reflection only. I've created those locators now, which will help me further minimize my effort. So that leaves it to scientist 2 and scientist 3. Scientist 2 says, and match it up phrase by phrase, color blue has the shortest wavelength. My question says color purple has the shortest wavelength. So scientist 2 is completely weakened, he's undermined. Right? Okay. Moving on, question 5. Suppose ocean waters contain a layer of particles on its surface that yielded a low reflective coefficient. This discovery would weaken the viewpoint of which scientist? So again, I don't need to read it all. I know the only scientist who's talking about reflection and hence would be impacted by a low reflective coefficient has to be scientist 1, which is your answer. Okay, move on. Moving on to question number 6. That's a beautiful one. I want all of you to read, this one very carefully. Yeah, I've increased the font size also. Just take a minute, read the question. Assume that light from sun is comprised of all wavelengths of light except blue. The present day electromagnetic spectrum shows color purple to have the shortest wavelength and the color red to have the longest wavelength. Based on this information, scientist 3 would most likely agree that the human eye would perceive the sky as. It's a long statement, but what I can make out is he's talking about scientist 3. So I go through scientist 3. I agree with scientist 2, blah, blah. Color of is actually a mixture, but however, blue slightly more dominant than green, shorter wavelength. Further, human eye will not see the color blue when looking closely at the sun. The light coming directly from the sun travels straight line. The human eye in this case is only able to see longer wavelengths of light, which translates into color like red and orange. A lot of students having read this would cross out this, and would say it has got nothing to do with oceans waters and tick J, which is an incorrect answer. Where have I made a mistake? Remember what kind of question this is. This is a head and tail question. And in the previous session, we learned how do we solve head and tail questions? We solve them tail first always. Let me ignore this purple and red. This is incorrect. I'm talking about scientist 3. He does not talk about reflections from oceans waters. That leaves me with H and J. Shorter wavelengths of light are scattered more strongly. Longer wavelengths of light are scattered more strongly. Nobody is saying that. What was the agreement point of scientist 2 and scientist 3? Shorter wavelengths of light are scattered more strongly. So the answer here has to be H. Where did we make a mistake in the first case? Why we did not pick up H? We crossed out H because it talks about human eye would perceive the sky as, where the last lines here talk only about the color of sun. So be careful. Small is beautiful on this test. Less is more. And more is nowhere. Read as little as possible, the relevant stuff. So if you go through the recommended strategy, which says tail first always, you'll rarely get this question incorrect because remember, whenever a head tail question becomes very difficult, only one tail is going to be correct. Only one tail, which means you would end up answering the question without processing the head at all, using just about half of the total effort. Moving on. Question 7. Suppose ocean waters dried up and were eliminated from the surface of the earth. What impact would this have on scientist 3 explanation? It will have no impact because scientist 3 is not talking about ocean's waters, he's talking about wavelengths. How would it make an impact? So B would be the correct answer. I think I would leave this one here and we'll move on now and look at a real ACT passage. But I hope you've absorbed what I've been trying to tell you all this while. So just give me one moment. Let me look at one such passage. Okay, there we have. It's a slightly tricky one. Huh? Okay. By choice, I've chosen a tougher passage for you. Okay, here, read with me. What do? Do we read the entire paragraph? No, we don't read. Last line. 2 scientists discuss how gas giant planets like Jupiter form from planet cores in stellar nebulae. Do you understand what he's talking about? I do not, and neither do I have to. Let's go and read the first line. And there are only 2 scientists, so I may read more than one line. I may read actually 2 lines. A planet core continuously attracts additional solid particles from stellar nebula, gradually increasing its mass. If a planet core reaches a minimum mass of 10 times the mass of Earth, 10 ME, its gravity is then strong enough to attract and hold gases from surrounding stellar nebula. So what I learn is, this gentleman says that in order to become something, I do not know what thing, something must become, this thing must become 10 times the mass of Earth. Scientists 2 now. Gas giant planets form in stellar nebula if gravity variations cause the nebula to suddenly fragment into 2 or massive spherical clumps of gas and dust called gas giant protoplanets GGPP, each having a planet core at the center that is no larger than 6 ME. I see a difference. The first one says it should be at least 10 ME. The second one says it should be at max 6 ME. I am not reading any further. I'm not reading any further. With this, I'm going to go directly into questions. So question 22. What are the 2 scientists' estimates of mass of a planet core that later becomes center of a gas giant planet? And remember, for such things, what did we discuss? I have my answer in 2 parts. I'll be solving it in 2 parts. I'll not be solving both of them together. As in, if you understand a bit of physics, I would say here, always follow parallel processing rather than serial processing. So here we go. Scientist 1 says, not exactly 6 ME, it says at least 10 ME. That answers my question. I don't have to look at the other one. Scientist 1 clearly says minimum mass 10 times. Sorry. I could have solved it from scientist 2 also, which says at most 6 ME. Okay, let's quickly go into the next question. Based on scientist one's discussion, which of the following statements gives the most likely reason Earth is not a gas giant planet? No, that's so simple to answer. Earth is not a gas giant planet because Earth is not 10 times the mass of Earth. Read the options. A planet core that became Earth was not massive enough to attract and hold sufficient amount of gases. Obviously, it had to become 10 times the mass of Earth to be able to do that. So that answer is simple for us to get. And if you read through the remaining options, it was not massive enough, did not contain enough gases. Okay, not required. The discovery that some stellar nebulae remain in existence for more than 10 million years would contradict a statement made by. Now I'll have to read the scientists again. And I'll read where I left off. The formation of a 10 ME planet core takes approximately 1 million years. The time required for a 10 ME planet core to then attract minimum 300 ME gases and become GGP like Jupiter is 10 million to 100 million. So he says it will take anywhere from 10 million to 100 million years. Let's go to the other one. A GGP forms in less than 1000 years. After formation, the entire process from start of GGPP to new gas giant takes only about 1 million years. So it says in 1 million, it will convert to a gas giant planet. The first one says it will take 10 million years to 100 million years. So if we find that it has remained in existence for more than 10 million years, it is not going to contradict the first scientist. It is going to contradict the second scientist. Simple affair. Okay, moving on. Boys and girls, what kind of question is this? This is a head and tail, and that's how we're going to attack it. Let's read the question. Suppose a planet core in a stellar nebula has over time attracted and held 200 ME of gases from the nebula. Would scientist one be likely to claim that this planet core surrounded by 200 ME of gases in a gas giant planet like Jupiter? Okay. Scientist one we are talking about. We're talking about some gases. Minimum of 300 ME of gases. Let's read the options now. Tail upwards. Scientist one claims that less than 200 ME of gases must be attracted. That's incorrect. He says minimum 300 must be attracted. Scientist one claims that no less than 200 ME of gases must be attracted. No, he claims that. Scientist one claims that more than 200 ME of gases must be attracted. Yes, this may be my answer. Scientist one claims that no more than. This is also incorrect. So what's my answer? I've not been required to legislate on the yes and no also, and I've been able to solve this question. The discovery of which of the following objects would provide the strongest support for scientist two viewpoint? Scientist two's viewpoint was what? It takes no more than 1 million years. So very quickly, H and J are ruled out because there's no talk of 100 million years. He doesn't talk that long. And between F and G, your correct answer would be G, several 1 million year old stars, each with 2 orbiting gas giant planets. If we found that out, that's a support for scientist two's viewpoint, which says that it takes only about 1 million years for a gas giant planet to form. So that's how you got to approach. Again, the key to success on the conflicting viewpoints question is lots and lots and lots and lots of practice. Make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, come back, solve more questions, make more mistakes, learn from those mistakes. And I mean, you'll end up mastering the science. Conflicting viewpoints or data representations or research summaries, I think in a matter of about a month, that's about it. Thanks, Harshal. I think that was about what I had to say. Shorter session, but I could not extend it any longer.
Yeah. So that was really a great session. Actually, in this type of sections, students have a lot of fear just looking at the long questions, long options, and it's really difficult to even get a start to solve this question. There were a lot of things to learn from this session, and one thing I really liked more about the session was the less is more part, and like developing that skill. So thank you once again uh, for this particular session, sir.
Thank you, guys. See you at 7 for the last session today.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank
So,
you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. One question here. How to command over these questions? Go through the video again. Go through the video. I've given you the books names. Thank you so much.